Hey there everybody, it's Mark Crilly. I'm back with another How to Draw video. You know, people have been asking me to do a shading video for years, literally years. And I am finally getting around to it today. What I've done is I've drawn my character Miki from Miki Falls 3 times basically exactly the same pose. And none of them really have much shading, and so what I'm going to do is show you 3 different ways to shade these characters in. So let's go ahead and move in close on this first one, and we'll get to it. Okay, so this first style of shading involves just a bunch of parallel diagonal lines, and I'm just sort of dashing them in here as quickly as I can. If it goes outside of the lines, that's not a huge deal. I can clean that up later. But the main thing is to try to get them all parallel to one another. And here we go, do the cleanup right now. Basically try to create a very even tone. And then on top of that, you can kind of go back in with further lines if you want to add more shading to give extra darkness in certain areas. But, you know, this is a straightforward approach where every single line that I do, basically, they are all facing in exactly the same direction. And then, you know, you don't really have to think about things. You don't have to make decisions every time you decide to shade in an area. It's pretty much automatic. Now, I'm right-handed, so this is going from the lower left to the upper right. That's very natural. It sort of, for me, it follows the pivot. If I were left-handed, it would be going, you know, lower right to upper left, I'm sure. So anyway, I wanted to start with this because it is just sort of an uncomplicated approach to shading. And it doesn't give a whole lot of depth, I don't think. There's a certain flatness to an image like this, but it can be a useful approach. And so I'm going to pull the camera back, and I'm going to kind of do this whole thing using this technique in time-lapse, and then we can move on to the second one. Alright, so there you have it, pretty much done with this one. I'm going to add just a little more shading along the sleeves here. I should point out that the pencil I'm using is a Dixon Oriole, which is a little different. Usually I'm using a Dixon Ticonderoga, and I'd like to claim that it's because I did this on purpose and I wanted to show you, but actually I just couldn't find my Dixon Ticonderoga. So this is... I work with what I find, people. That's just the way it goes sometimes. So, yeah, I thought I'd start with this one. I think it's a nice basic technique. And you know what I think this could be used for a lot of times is when you do like a flashback scene and you want to separate those scenes from the modern day scenes. I think this can give a nice sort of nostalgic tinge to things. I wouldn't want to use this shading technique all the time, though. So anyway, let's go ahead and move on to the next one, which is going to be a little more nuanced and probably take a little more explaining. Okay, so with this one, we're going to give a wider variety of directions to the lines, and you can see me sort of roping off an area here. That's where the highlight on the hair is going to go. When I was in college studying drawing, the teachers always told us you should have your lines follow the form of the object that you're drawing. So these lines are kind of, you're imagining where the hair would fall on the head, and then you're having your lines kind of change direction as the head rounds. You know, it's in the round, and these lines start going in the opposite direction, curving, just to sort of suggest the form. And this goes back to, you know, like Renaissance drawing techniques, basically. That if you use that as your basic guideline, that the lines will always be suggesting the form of the object, then your drawing will become more three-dimensional. You get down to something like this with the cloth, it becomes a little trickier to decide, you know, what is the form, how do the lines suggest that, but basically you can tell when your lines are fighting against the surface. You know, you just basically imagine that surface and make sure that your lines are working with it, falling across it the way they would. if I don't know, if you were to lay a piece of string across it, say. So these lines here, I'm trying to have them fan out just a little bit to suggest the surface of the cloth there. Obviously, when you get to certain things like the eyes, you know, are you going to suggest the surface of the eyes? Probably not. So I'm just going to go ahead and tone that in somewhat randomly, maybe just with those sort of diagonal lines like I did before. I'm going to try to suggest the shading of the neck here. That's something where I could maybe try to follow the actual direction or the surface area. Give you some sense of how that might work. But you get the idea. I'm going to go ahead and pull back and do what I did before, do the whole rest of it in time-lapse, and then we'll move on to the third version. Alright, so you can see how this version has a little more depth to it. I mean, part of that is just because I've added considerable more darkness to the dark areas, and you could go back into this version and do more and more of these, you know, same diagonal type lines to darken it up, and then this would get considerably more depth. But you know, I'm not saying one version is better than the other. Both of them have their benefits and drawbacks, I suppose. So let's go ahead and move on to version number 3. All right, so the first two versions that I showed you were very much line-based approaches to shading. This time, we are going to try to eliminate all sign of lines and to instead use sort of circular motions to create an even tone that, you know, doesn't show any of the lines that made it up. I think this style of toning would be very difficult to do with a mechanical pencil because, you know, they're always super sharp. You may notice that I'm holding my pencil very far away from the tip and at a very low angle to the paper. That is allowing me to create very sort of wide, sweeping lines. Especially if you hold your pencil in one position for a very long time, the tip will wear down until you're getting very thick lines that are coming off of just that one edge of the pencil. I think it would be very hard for me to create this even tone if my pencil were at a super, boy, what do you call it, like a right angle to the page. So definitely the way you hold the pencil, it's always important, actually, no matter how you're, at what point in the drawing process you're in, the place at which you hold the pencil and the angle at which it is touching the page, that always matters. It always affects the types of lines that you're doing, but it's certainly important here as well for me to get this kind of, hopefully, fairly even tone. And, you know, like I said, there's sort of vaguely circular motions that I'm making here. I'm trying little by little to eliminate any sign of the pencil tip touching the page. And in a way, this is, I would say, a very kind of forgiving approach. I mean, it's sort of cautious. You're gradually building it up. It's hard to suddenly make a huge mistake when you're using this approach because it is so incremental. So if you're the kind of person who's, you know, like when I did that first one where it was all diagonal lines, I could almost hear people saying, dude, I can't do diagonal lines like that. I can't even draw a straight line, you know. And so basically that if you have trouble drawing straight lines, then that first approach is going to be very difficult for you. This approach may be considerably more within your grasp. So that's basically my idea with this video was to give you several different options. And let me just say right now, I do not mean to say these are the 3 ways. You people who watch my videos, I'm always saying this is not the way. It is just a way. Whoops. Sorry about that. I got a little excited and knocked the camera out of position. Very, very professional of me there. Anyway, but yes, I do tend to say that a lot in my videos about this is not meant to be the way, these 3 different versions are just that, only 3 among many, many different approaches. So, but basically with this version, we're slowly filling in things and then little by little building towards darker areas where we need them. I think maybe it's time for me to go ahead and kick this into time-lapse to finish it off, and then we'll come back with some final words before I end the video. All right, so I think we've kind of covered everything here. What I want to do is zoom back in and give you just 3 up-close shots of the face in each drawing so that you can compare the different shading techniques and see the effects that they achieve. So let's go ahead and do that right now. All right, well, there you have it. 3 different ways of shading in basically the exact same drawing. And, you know, of course, I think some people are going to choose their favorite and say, I like this style best, and that's the style I will always use all the time forever. But if you're serious about drawing, it's probably a good idea to learn a variety of shading techniques and be able to, you know, pull them out for different purposes on different drawings. But anyway, certainly this one is the fastest, or takes the least amount of time. This one easily takes the most amount of time out of all of them. But let me go ahead and end the video. I want to thank anyone who has bought my graphic novel series, Meekeep Falls, 4 books in that series, and 2 books in the Brody's Ghost series of graphic novels from Dark Horse Comics. I am so grateful to anyone who picks up those books, and thanks so much for subscribing, for leaving comments, for linking to my videos on Facebook and Twitter and stuff like that. But for now, let me go ahead and lay the pencil down. I want to thank you all for watching my videos, and I will be back with another one real soon.